Dandelions growing on top of the hill. Mountains in the distance, wind blowing through the field.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video we need to talk about the August JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted by none other than governing body helper Gary Breaux. Yes, the same Gary Breaux who featured in the notorious Pillowgate videos. More about that later. There's a lot to get through in this particular broadcasting episode, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Our broadcast this month has the theme, Cherish Your Privilege of Prayer. Do you think it's appropriate to label prayer as a miracle? Miracles are described in our New World Translation glossary of Bible terms as actions or phenomena that surpass all powers known to humans and are attributed to a supernatural agency. Does prayer fit that description? The moment you say a prayer, your innermost thoughts and feelings are communicated instantly to the Creator from wherever you are, even if you pray silently. That's certainly beyond any power humans know. Therefore, the fact that a human can call out to God in prayer and be heard by Him is truly a miracle.
I'm getting bored of saying this, but again, it wouldn't be a JW Broadcasting episode without having the definition of a rudimentary word explained to us, as though we are totally ignorant of what basic words mean. But I take exception to the argumentation we're receiving here. Gary Breaux, assuming he has written this material, and I believe that he has, I believe that those who host these episodes prepare their own material, maybe they get a bit of help, but it's their concepts and it's their ideas that we're hearing. Gary Breaux seems to have started from the position of prayer is a miracle, and so his opening comments are persuading his audience that that is the case, that prayer is indeed a miracle. But his argument is weighed down with presupposition, with the assumption that when someone says a prayer in the way that Watchtower prescribes, that this prayer is heard by God and that God responds in some way, whether it's detectable or not. This is making a whole lot of assumptions that simply cannot be proven. All a prayer is someone saying something or thinking something with the understanding that they are communicating with God. Whether they are communicating with God is another matter entirely. And if you're going to suggest that when prayers are addressed to God in the way prescribed by Watchtower, that they will automatically be heard, the burden of evidence rests on you. You have to prove it. If you're then going to make the argument, therefore it's a miracle that you have a hotline to God when you pray.
Today our lives are very complicated and in some cases very troubled. Whether young or old, there are times we may feel overwhelmed with our problems. At other times we may simply feel alone and helpless. What can we do? The Apostle Paul says that prayer will help.
This is straight out of the Colt Playbook when it comes to manipulating people. Gary Breaux is giving people the problem and insisting that they have this problem, and then coming along and saying, but don't worry, I've got the solution. And the solution is to, again, pray in the way that Watchtower suggests. And wouldn't you know, in order for your prayers to be heard by God, you have to be doing everything that Jehovah's organization requires of you. The cult narrative only begins to make sense against a backdrop of woe, of misery, of sadness, of confusion, of longing for answers. And charlatans like Gary Breaux come along and say, don't worry, I have the solution for you. All you have to do is accept everything I have to tell you as the absolute truth. Don't question anything. Follow all the instructions I'm about to give you, and everything's going to work out well.
What else will help us to build our love and trust in our God Jehovah? It's more than recognizing that He hears our prayers. We must be convinced that He answers our prayers. What evidence do we have that Jehovah answers prayers? Let's look at some specific answers to prayers, both past and present. Jehovah fought for Judah by striking confusion into the ranks of the enemy so that they slaughtered one another. Jehoshaphat's prayer was answered in a mighty way. The account in verses 7 through 11 tells us that an angel of Jehovah led Peter out of jail and delivered him to safety. Imagine how these events must have drawn the Christians in Jerusalem closer to Jehovah when they saw that He had answered their prayers.
So firstly, I want to draw your attention to the very interesting language that Gary Breaux uses, where he says you have to be convinced. It's not enough to just pray as a Christian and hope that your prayers are going to be heard. You have to be convinced that that's going to happen. So there's no room for any doubt or ambiguity when you are a Jehovah's Witness. You've got to believe 100%, otherwise you're not doing it quite right. So if you think about it, this is thought crime. If you have the wrong thoughts, if your convictions are tainted in any way by any murmurings of doubt, then you're not doing it right, and it's wrong, and shame on you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just look at what Gary Breaux considers to be evidence that prayers are answered. This is classic circular reasoning. We know that prayers are answered because here are some Bible examples of individuals praying and their prayers being answered. In the same way that a Spider-Man comic isn't evidence of Spider-Man, you can't point to the Bible and say, I rest my case, Your Honor. This proves without a doubt that not only does God exist, but also that He answers prayers, because let's just look at this verse, shall we? And this prayer is being answered. It's just so juvenile. I struggle to believe that anyone could take this seriously. But Gary Breaux is speaking to an audience that, like him, have reached a point where they can swallow anything. This, disturbingly, is evidence that is convincing to Gary Breaux, because after decades in this organization, he appears to be entirely bereft of critical thinking skills, and he knows that when he presents these sorts of non-arguments to Jehovah's Witnesses, they will be similarly convinced, because they don't have critical thinking skills, because critical thinking skills are not encouraged in the organization. In fact, the exact opposite of critical thinking is encouraged, as is evident from what Gary Breaux said just a few moments earlier, when he said it's not okay to have doubts about prayer. You have to be convinced. There's no room for skepticism in this organization. There's no room to analyze claims as to whether they're true or not and be critical. No, you have to swallow everything, hook, line, and sinker, or you're not doing it right.
What about today? Consider the example of our brothers in South Korea. Over the years, more than 19,000 of our brothers have been imprisoned as conscientious objectors to military service. Did you personally pray in behalf of these brothers that they might endure in their faith, or that they might be released from prison if it was Jehovah's will? We're sure you did. In fact, many of you prayed for these brothers by name, just as the congregation in the first century prayed in behalf of Peter. With what result? In 2018, a series of court rulings in South Korea finally recognized conscientious objection to military service for religious reasons as a fundamental human right, and our brothers were gradually released from their prison bonds. What do you think? Did Jehovah hear our prayers in behalf of these dear brothers? As a worldwide brotherhood, there can be no doubt that our incessant prayers to Jehovah were a major factor in these marvelous developments, and we praise and thank Jehovah that He's heard our prayers.
I am honestly intensely embarrassed that I ever had anything to do with this organization when it is spewing forth such intellectually bankrupt argumentation. Millions of Jehovah's Witnesses are here being told, well, first of all, they're being guilt-tripped if they didn't pray for these witnesses in South Korea. Oh, we're confident that you were among those who were praying for these brothers in South Korea, meaning if you weren't, shame on you. But witnesses who did pray are being told that their prayers are responsible for a change in law in South Korea, ending the practice of imprisoning Jehovah's Witnesses for conscientious objection. I've dealt with this time and time again. This is having it both ways. You simply cannot point to the Russian regime and say, because they are oppressing God's people, because they are throwing us in jail or threatening us with fines or busting into our kingdom halls, therefore this proves that our religion is true, because we're being persecuted, and it's further proof that these are the last days because Satan's system is coming after us. You can't say that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, look at South Korea, where witnesses were being imprisoned in the case of conscientious objection, and then say, well, because they had a change of heart, because they ruled that they would no longer do this, and because they freed our brothers, this is also proof that we are God's one and only true organization, because this only happened because the prayers were answered, because Jehovah's people were praying about it, and Jehovah did something and made a few adjustments in the minds of lawyers and judges and politicians, and voila, the whole situation got sorted out. It's having it both ways in the most ridiculous way. And again, I'm just embarrassed to have ever fallen for this sort of thinking. Shame on Gary Breaux for pushing this sort of twisted thinking, this sort of playground reasoning on millions of Jehovah's Witnesses.
What does this review of how Jehovah answered the prayers of His servants in the past and present do for us? Doesn't it build confidence that Jehovah is listening and acting on the prayers of His people?
Well, it might if you'd actually given us some evidence of Jehovah answering people's prayers. And I suppose you'd have to watch the whole thing. I've just given you a few clips to demonstrate how appalling Gary Breaux's reasoning is. But his argument is basically, well, we know that Jehovah answers prayers because it says so in the scriptures, and also South Korea, where witnesses were released or have been released from jail, and there's been a change of heart with the authorities so that they are no longer imprisoning witnesses for conscientious objection. Never mind the fact that this is having it both ways, that we're not applying the same reasoning to what's going on in Russia. It's a good things, bad things situation where if something good happens, this is proof. If something bad happens, this is also proof. In other words, anything could happen. Absolutely anything could happen involving Jehovah's Witnesses, good or bad. And Gary Breaux, this huckster, this charlatan, will find a reason, find some way in which he can twist things so that this is proof that this is Jehovah's one and only true organization and that he is answering prayers in some way. So no, Gary, you haven't convinced anyone other than those who, like you, are entirely bereft of critical thinking skills.
The Apostle John had that confidence. He wrote at 1 John 5:14, "Say a brother wears an undergarment that's so tight it rubs his penis as he moves around. He gets aroused and even ejaculates. Is he masturbating?" But now the question is, when was the last time that Jehovah answered one of your personal prayers?
I don't know about it being an answer to my personal prayer, but Pillowgate was certainly a huge deal when it comes to having something funny to comment on. And look, I try not to doctor these JW Broadcasting episodes too much. I don't want to be accused of foul play, but I just couldn't resist a little reference to Pillowgate there, just in case there are any watching this rebuttal who haven't seen that material yet, or my rebuttal to it. Just an unforgettable experience of seeing Watchtower's obsession with sex and masturbation and pornea and this culture of repression on full show. So yeah, if you've not seen that already, please do check it out, and please do just indulge me. I needed to include a reference to Pillowgate at least somewhere in this rebuttal.
Take time to meditate on Jehovah's response to your prayerful requests. If you're married, freely discuss matters that you've prayed for in common and how Jehovah may be answering those prayers. Be observant and alert to things that are happening around you, and learn to connect these things with the answers to your prayers.
This is just an observation on the production more than anything. I find it so cringeworthy when they show these stock images of people praying or people thinking, as though we can't understand what Gary Breaux is saying unless we see before us a visual representation of someone praying or someone stood in the street just thinking about something.
This process of identifying answers to our prayers should be learned early on in one's spiritual development. We cannot take it for granted that our children or our Bible students will connect the answers they receive to the prayers they've offered. One witness said, "I find that people feel closer to God if I help them to recognize answers to their prayers."
This seems to be just an overt call for parents to, again, indoctrinate their children as young as possible, in this case by making sure children are convinced that their prayers are going to be answered. No room for instilling critical thinking skills in children. No allowance for how inappropriate it is to hijack the trust that children have in their parents in such a cynical way by using that period in their lives to implant ideas and implant beliefs that they would almost certainly question if they were older and in possession of critical thinking skills. The child indoctrination, whenever it rears its head in these broadcasting episodes, just always sickens me.
What if we can't identify the answer to one of our prayers? Does that mean it wasn't according to Jehovah's will? Not necessarily. There are two important factors that might be involved. One is that Jehovah knows the best time and way to answer our prayers. He takes all matters into consideration. The answer may not come according to our timetable, but it will come. So we must be patient and keep looking for the answer.
Isn't this the exact same strategy that any televangelist might use? This idea that, oh, well, if your prayers aren't being answered, maybe it's just not the right time, or maybe God has other plans. You hear this idea, oh, God works in mysterious ways. Isn't that more or less what we've heard there from Gary Breaux? It's another example of Jehovah's Witnesses being encouraged to have this thinking of having it both ways. If anything happens, or if anything doesn't happen, there's always an explanation. There's always some way of interpreting an outcome or no outcome as being proof that the prayer has been responded to in some way.
I remember many times falling on my knees and praying and thinking, this is it. I'm tested beyond what I can bear. And Jehovah would strengthen me. And someone would come, or they would say something, and they fed us. The brother made a schedule, and he said, you're gonna feed these friends. And the brother's instructions were, you don't bring it and just drop the food. You stay with those friends. It made me cry, the love and the caring that we experienced. One time I remember the hallways of this hospital, 1,500 miles away from our home, started filling up with people. To me, that's answering prayers too. It was hard for us to get out of the hospital. So they recorded talks. They would look us in the eye and they'd say, now you need to listen to this. It will keep you strong. Jared was worried about us, and he made it clear he was going to be fine. He just didn't know if we were going to be.
He died in June of 1992. He was at home, and the last thing he said to us was, work hard so we can all be together again.
So this is the story of Jared Scepter, and I can only say that if you haven't already seen my video, The Martyrdom of Jared Scepter, please do check that out, because I don't want to go over this story again in too much detail, because I did find it genuinely upsetting and distressing. The fact that for the first time Watchtower is on its JW broadcasting platform celebrating the martyrdom of children over its prohibition on blood. In fact, the whole reason why this rebuttal is so late, I'm now filming this rebuttal, what day is it today? The 21st of September, so we're well into the next month. I had initially planned to do the rebuttal at the end of August, so it would have been in time, but doing the preparation for this video and watching that story for the first time completely knocked me sideways. And I thought, how can I just do a normal rebuttal when we have here the worst thing that I have ever seen? No exaggeration. And I've seen lots of terrible things in these JW broadcasting episodes, things that have really made my skin crawl. But in all of the years that they've been spewing out this propaganda, I can't think of anything that's worse than this. You have someone who literally died because of Watchtower's teachings, and they're celebrating it. And as I said, again, I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much, but as I said in the Martyrdom video, it's all about them, isn't it? It's all about the parents, all about how they feel, all about whether their bellies were full with witnesses bringing them food, all about whether they had support in the congregation and at the hospital. And it's not about the fact that they killed their boy. It's simply shocking. And as I said in the Martyrdom video as well, I hope they never wake up. I think it would destroy them and make a terrible situation even worse if they were to find out exactly what they'd done. Just a shocking, shocking story. And also, after I'd made my Martyrdom video, I realised that based on the dates that they give, Jared would have been my age. So that also made it quite personal for me. He's someone who I'll never get to meet, never get to interview about his experience, because he paid the ultimate price, didn't he, for Watchtower's selfishness and stupidity and lack of understanding in interpreting the Bible. But anyway, I want to jump straight to the comments that were made and just go over again what Gary Breaux had to say in response to this story.
And did you notice how Gary, Beth, and Jared felt Jehovah's loving support as they prayed throughout this heart-wrenching trial? They asked for wisdom when seeking medical treatment for Jared. Jehovah put his arms around them and listened when they felt overwhelmed with grief and negative feelings. He strengthened Jared's hope in the resurrection and helped brother and sister Scepter stay spiritually strong. Can there be any doubt that Jehovah was answering their prayers? Doesn't that strengthen our conviction that Jehovah will also answer Jared's prayer that they all will be together again? No, Jehovah didn't miraculously cure Jared. But through his endurance and strong faith, Jared gives a witness to the universe that even a child that trusts in Jehovah can prove his loyalty to death. Now, other situations may turn out differently and not end up in death. If an individual feels that relief was because of Jehovah's intervention, he should certainly give thanks. However, we must recognize that Jehovah knows the best way to handle matters so that it results in honor to his name and to the lasting good of his servants.
Watching that again, I'm still dumbfounded by how ridiculous and insensitive and vacuous Gary Breaux's comments are. He's again wanting it both ways. Oh, in Jared's case, he died, but his prayers were answered because he and his parents were spiritually strengthened. Of course, if Jared had have lived, this would also have been his prayers being answered. It would have been an intervention by God. And we can say the same thing of anyone who somehow miraculously survives refusing blood in that situation. It all depends on whether it's going to bring praise to Jehovah's name. It all depends on how God wants to handle matters. And in this case, the best way for God to handle matters was for Jared to die.
Our personal prayers will help us to remain spiritually alert and active in God's service as we await the great tribulation that lies just ahead of us. So in summary, our prayers to Jehovah reveal the closeness of our relationship with Him and the degree of our dependence upon Him. They show the trueness of our faith, the depth of our devotion, and the genuineness of our appreciation. Our prayers also help us remain spiritually alert as we endure these last days before the Great Tribulation. We'll be drawn even closer to Jehovah when we learn to recognize His answers to our prayers. Yes, we can be assured that Jehovah will not fail in giving us the desires of our heart as we continue rendering Him sacred service. May we all cherish our marvelous, miraculous privilege of prayer.
It really is just stultifying nonsense that Gary Breaux is coming out with. It's white noise, isn't it? Everything is apparently to do with the Great Tribulation and the last days. It can't simply be a case of, believers in God deriving comfort from having this internal monologue with the Almighty, regardless of whether there's anyone on the receiving end. And I can kind of accept that there might be some psychological value to processing your thoughts in the prayer format, irrespective of whether prayers are being listened to. But as far as Gary Breaux is concerned, and as far as Watchtower is concerned, it all has to do somehow with preparing God's people for the last days and for the Great Tribulation, which we've just heard is going to strike at any moment. So watch this space, I suppose. Just the same carrot being dangled, that if people will just put their trust in prayer, if they will commit themselves to doing things Watchtower's way, everything's going to work out for them.
Let's look at one practical example when prayer is of utmost importance, when confronted with the powers of wicked spirits. Spiritism is very real and dangerous. Yet with Jehovah's help, people can break free from its hold. In this dramatization, notice how one sister helped her Bible student to do that.
Emma and I were so worried about her Bible study, Balesa. She had spent another sleepless night after again hearing her dead grandmother's voice, plus the sound of slamming doors and items crashing in the house. Balesa put an amulet on her baby's wrist for protection, but the terror continued all night long. Of course, it wasn't really her grandmother, and nothing in the house was broken, but the attack was real.
Welcome to the wacky world of Watchtower, in which spiritism is real. It's undeniable that spirits are attacking people through amulets and that sort of thing. And in fact, it's such a pressing problem that we're going to make a HD dramatization about it. And by the way, we have here the character Thomas. He seems to be the one who is talking in this, and his wife. And I'm a bit confused about the timeline of these dramatizations, because Watchtower seems to want to portray Thomas as someone who starts off as an unbelieving husband and gradually embraces the truth and then transitions, it seems, into a Jehovah's Witness. And what they've done is they've got Thomas here seemingly involving himself in the preaching work, which you have to be an unbaptized publisher in order to do. And then if you fast forward to the September broadcast, you're then almost backwards in the timeline, and he's for the first time accepting a Bible study. So how they've figured out this bizarre timeline where Thomas is visiting people in a preaching capacity with his wife, I have no idea at all. You'd have to ask Watchtower. But anyway, they visit this Bible study of Thomas's wife, and there's this problem with an amulet that the spirits are using to terrify this family.
Stories about the spirit world weren't new to me. Our neighbors, the people I work with, the people in our territory, almost everyone believes in spirits, whether they admit it or not. No, more than believe, they fear them. I had only been studying the Bible about 6 months longer than Palesa. But my study had proved to me that wicked spirits are here on earth, that they try to interact with people, and that they are dangerous enemies. Emma called the elders for help. She didn't want us to handle the situation on our own. As Emma told the story, I had to speak up and tell the elders that she was leaving things out. But I was surprised when the elders said they didn't need all the details. They explained that while we are aware of the danger that demons pose, we do not spend time talking about their activities. Even Jesus, when he was on earth, could have told his disciples many stories about the doings of wicked spirits, but instead, he focused on Jehovah and his activities. We should do the same, instead of telling stories about what the demons may or may not have done. The elders skillfully used the Bible, shepherding everyone. We read Ephesians 6 verse 11. Put on the complete suit of armor from God, so that you may be able to stand firm against the crafty acts of the devil. Those instructions were so important. A soldier would be vulnerable if he only wore part of his armor, or if he didn't keep it in good repair.
Just incredible, really, when you think about all of the real issues and real concerns that Watchtower could be addressing, and here they are addressing interactions with the spirit world, as though look, it's not even worth debating. This actually happens. Exhibit A, here's a dramatization in which Thomas pulls up in a car and a scary person is looking at him. So clearly demons and spirits must exist. It's so strange. And actually, I must just add further to what I was saying earlier. Watching this again, I'm almost convinced now that Watchtower has got the order of these dramatizations wrong, because here he says he's been studying the Bible for many months, and again in the next month's broadcast, so this is the August broadcast, in the September broadcast he's going to start his study. So it seems we're going backwards and forwards in the timeline. Anyway, again, it's just odd to me that they would not even attempt to demonstrate that this is a real phenomenon. And I obviously uploaded or re-uploaded a video on the paranormal recently, and I'm aware that this is an area in which there's a lot of emotions about whether there are ghosts or apparitions or whether they've seen things. And look, I just want to add, in addition to what I said in my paranormal video, please do check it out if you're interested in this. I just want to add that if there are ghosts or demons or manifestations from another dimension or whatever, I want to know about it. I'm interested first and foremost, like many of you I would assume, in my perception of reality being as truthful as possible, no matter how uncomfortable or no matter how awkward those truths are. I want my knowledge of reality to be calibrated so that it's accurate, so that it's truthful. So if there are demons or there are ghosts or whatever, I want to know about it. But I have to orient my understanding in this area based on evidence. Because if I'm just going to go off what other people say or other people's anecdotes what that does is it takes me right back to square one, where I might as well be religious again, or I might as well just follow any religion of the first person who comes along and says, oh, well, you need to have a relationship in Jesus because I've got a relationship with Jesus and this happened to me, so if you do this and blah, blah, blah. My beliefs need to be based on evidence, and I cannot accept the existence of these entities without evidence. I'm not dismissing the possibility that there could be things out there that I can't explain or that science hasn't caught up with yet. But going back to what I was saying earlier about critical thinking and how Gary Breaux's speech was completely without any critical thinking, in fact, celebrating the absence of critical thinking. Let's at least have that as our basis for understanding the world around us and the universe around us. And when it comes to spirit beings and demon manifestations, don't you think it's a little bit odd that we're living at a time in history where a significant percentage of the world's population have in their pockets a device that has a movie camera that filmmakers and news teams of previous decades would have sold limbs to have? I mean, the cameras in modern phones are phenomenal. I am actually filming this video now on an old smartphone because the camera's really good on it, and I like the quality. But isn't it interesting that we have millions of these devices in circulation in people's hands so that they're just in their pockets? If something happens, someone could just whip out the phone and film it, and still we don't have compelling evidence of paranormal or supernatural things happening. Doesn't that alone say something? Just something for you to think about. I know I'm going to get hate over this, or I know I'm going to have people commenting and saying, oh, you just don't understand. If it would have happened to you, you'd know, and you wouldn't be so skeptical. I think that we all ought to be skeptical. Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence, and it's therefore very silly, let's face it, of Watchtower to be treating the whole issue of the spirit world as just this slam dunk situation that they don't even need to argue over. We just need to address how we deal with these spirit entities.
Then we read Ephesians 4 verse 27. Do not give the devil an opportunity. The elders explained to Palesa that the string around the daughter's wrist is not part of the armor from God. Instead, it is giving Satan an opportunity to continue to harass the family. The brothers reminded us that anyone who wants Jehovah's protection must completely break free from anything associated with superstition, spiritism, and demon worship. Who would ever choose to side with wicked spirits instead of with Jehovah? Emma reminded Palesa of how urgent the situation was, but only Palesa could decide what she would do. I want to be a loyal servant of Jehovah. That's why I'm getting baptized. I've decided not to listen to or tell any more stories about the demons. But more than that, I needed to look at other parts of my life. Am I doing anything that would give the devil an opportunity? Clearly, there are still changes I need to make.
Did you notice how they prayed for Jehovah's direction? They followed the principle of Psalm 37:5. Commit your way to Jehovah, rely on him, and he will act in your behalf. And as you notice, as he's committing his life course to Jehovah, Thomas's Christian conscience has now started to guide him, and he likely realizes that he has to safeguard his heart from things that may tempt him.
Yes, Thomas is getting embroiled in life as a Jehovah's Witness. He's learning about all the do's and don'ts, all the things he's allowed to do and not allowed to do. In this case, he's not even allowed to talk about what some of these demons and ghosts are getting up to. And you see him there in front of the television, and he switches off the television. And I think that might be a message that even the television could be a source of, you know, demons being able to interfere. I know when I was little, I was never allowed to watch Ghostbusters. In fact, to this day, I still haven't watched Ghostbusters. I've just not got round to it. But I'm pretty sure I would have watched Ghostbusters by this point, if not for the fact that when I was little, I was told that if we had that sort of film on, it would literally provide kind of a portal for demons to come through the TV and into our home and start messing with us. So, gosh, so much superstition that I grew up with. And again, I'm not dismissing the idea that things might happen that might be unexplained. But I just wouldn't, even if I saw something, I just wouldn't trust my brain. I think our brains are so fallible and so capable of wrongly interpreting things. Just the other day, I was sat in our living room and staring at the fireplace, and there was a freezer bag that just happened to have been left on the fireplace, and it started moving by itself. And so I was immediately watching it because I thought it might be a mouse. And then I got closer to it, and it continued to move, albeit not quite as much, but there was clearly no mouse, but it was still moving by itself. And it looked like an odd thing, but you have to remember that it's just a piece of very light plastic in a house that could easily have a draft because it was opposite the stairs, and sometimes drafts come up the stairs. What's more likely that a spirit entity is taking the lightest object in the room and messing around with it, conveniently the lightest object, none of the heavier items of furniture. What's more likely, that a demon's doing that, or that it's simply the movement of air around the apartment? But again, if I were religiously minded, I could very easily have interpreted things differently. But we must move on in this broadcasting episode, because we're now going to transition from one of the stars of Pillowgate to the star of Bottlegate.
In this Bethel morning worship, Brother Morris of the governing body helps us to see why it requires effort to protect our relationship with Jehovah.
This morning I thought we'd talk about accepting the facts about our figurative heart and how that safeguards our relationship with Jehovah. Let's read today's text in its entirety. Jeremiah chapter 17. And what a sobering, inspired thought from our Heavenly Father. Jeremiah 17, and we'll read verse 9. The heart is more treacherous than anything else and is desperate.
Wise words there from Tony Morris, who, despite being caught in a liquor store on a Sunday morning, loading up with hundreds of dollars worth of very expensive single malt, in spite of the fact that he's among a group of men who are squeezing children for their ice cream money, in spite of all of this, there he is on the August 2019 JW Broadcasting, making a cameo in the form of a morning worship sermon, talking about how the figurative heart is treacherous. Who can know it? And look, I kind of expected to see Tony back in circulation. In the wake of Bottlegate, one or two were asking about whether he might be sanctioned in some way, whether he might be punished or removed from the governing body, perhaps. Because it was, I'm sorry, whatever you have to say on the subject, and I know there are many who, think that it was a case of it being blown out of proportion. It's just not a good look, especially for a religious leader. And you would think that if the governing body took their reputation seriously and wanted to be seen to apply the same standards to themselves that they apply to everyone else, you'd think that there might be some kind of, at least him being off the radar for a while. But he was appearing I think he appeared at an international convention in Texas over the summer. And here he is being shown in the August JW broadcasting episode. Now, it must be said that these broadcasting episodes are put together about 6 months in advance. So yeah, around sort of March time, I would imagine, would be when they would be putting this broadcasting episode together. And then they would need the kind of 6 month window. I know it's 6 months because we got the July 2018 broadcast leaked to us 6 months in advance. So I know that it's at least 6 months and they need that time period for the translation teams. So it could simply be that Tony's appearance here was decided even before Bottlegate, and that the people responsible for his appearance just didn't know that he was caught up in all that. But nonetheless, without wanting to dwell too much on what Tony has to say, I do want to pick out one or two clips.
So there we have it. That's the truth. That's what Jehovah makes very clear to us, that each and every one of us have to deal with a treacherous or deceitful figurative heart. And how encompassing the expression here, more treacherous than anything else, my. And what complicates it even more is it's desperate. It always wants its way. So a lot to meditate on. And now Jehovah put it here for the very reason we have to accept this fact. And to safeguard a relationship with him, we have to accept that this is the case. And you could be a fine Christian for many years, mature, nice outlook, nice attitude. But if you ever find yourself forgetting Jehovah's estimation of what we have within us in our figurative heart, then we're in danger. Because the devil will always exploit the fact that our imperfect figurative hearts are treacherous, deceitful, more than anything else, and is desperate. Matthew chapter 6, and a lot of spiritual food for thought. Of course, anything Jesus said is spiritual food for thought. And verse 13 of Matthew chapter 6, and do not bring us into temptation, but deliver us from the wicked one. So, been there for all these years. We could personally reflect on when's the last time we mentioned that in a prayer to our Father, Jehovah. Do not bring us into temptation, but deliver us from the wicked one, or rescue us from the wicked one. What are we really saying there? Well, we're asking our Heavenly Father to guide and help us so that we're not overreached by Satan. Very simple. See?
It's just so deliciously ironic to see Tony lecturing witnesses here about temptation and about, not being overreached by Satan, when based purely on, again, what we saw happen, the optics of him there in the liquor store. I mean, look, no one is saying that it's a slam dunk that he's definitely an alcoholic. But you just kind of picture him in those scenes against what he's saying here, where he's, essentially lecturing millions of Jehovah's Witnesses about not succumbing to temptation, and the two just don't go together at all well.
But the closer we get to the end, make no mistake, it's even more urgent to keep in mind the need to beg Jehovah to not bring us into temptation, to guide us so that we'll be delivered from this wicked one who wants to exploit the fact that we have a treacherous, traitorous, figurative heart, and that can ruin our relationship with Jehovah personally. Now, the Apostle Paul recognized this, and it's quite interesting what he wrote to his beloved brothers in Thessalonians, that first letter. So if you'd find 1 Thessalonians in chapter 3, found this quite revealing and tying in with the thought of accepting the facts about our figurative heart safeguards our relationship with our God and Father Jehovah. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 5, Paul writes, "That is why, when I could bear it no longer, I sent to learn of your faithfulness." Now notice, in case somehow the tempter might have tempted you, and our labor might have turned out to be in vain. So he didn't get into any specific detail, but it helps us to appreciate that there's this danger that somehow the tempter, Satan the devil, might tempt us. And this is connected with the need to beg Jehovah to deliver us or rescue us from the wicked one in his effort to tempt us to break our integrity and our cherished relationship with Jehovah being damaged. So he knows the heart's treacherous, and whoever we are and however long we've been in the truth, remember what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, somehow, because he's always looking to somehow lead us into breaking our integrity to Jehovah God.
Whoever we are, and no matter how long we've been in the truth, when he was saying those words, I couldn't help but wonder whether this was Tony Morris's version of a sort of apology to the Bethel family. Because if he were to apologize to the Bethel family, it would be something like that, you would imagine. Someone as arrogant and self-important as Tony Morris. You would imagine it being very vague and him just kind of going round in circles and not really getting anywhere and just rambling, which he clearly does in this morning worship. In fact, it's one of the most incoherent, rambling morning worships I think I've seen. It's really bad. So I was thinking about whether this might be some kind of attempt by Watchtower at damage limitation at putting out some kind of veiled message either to the Bethel family or to any witnesses who might be in the know about Bottlegate. But I've since come to realize that that's not the case. In fact, it's pointing more and more in the direction of this all just being a total coincidence. As I said earlier, these JW Broadcasting episodes are put together about 6 months in advance, so this material would have been decided on around February, March time, just before Bottlegate. And also, some of you may remember my good friend Arthur Weber, who is a friend of the channel and who has appeared on a Watchtower in Focus episode in the past. And in fact, Arthur will be coming to the bunker for an interview soon, hopefully. But Arthur pointed out that actually, if you try and look up the scripture that Tony Morris reads, Jeremiah 17 verse 9.
Let's read today's text in its entirety. Jeremiah 17 and We'll read verse 9.
If you look up the day's text that scripture applies to, it takes you right back to February 7th, 2018. So more than a year before Bottlegate is when this particular morning worship was given. So that kind of, in a way, tells us two things. First of all, it tells us that Watchtower is recycling morning worships for their JW broadcasting episodes that have been given over a year earlier. And out of all of the morning worships, bearing in mind they literally have one every morning at Bethel, out of all of the morning worships, this somehow is the one that makes the grade. Okay, fair enough. But also, as I've pointed out, those of you who follow the channel will know, I released a video where I asked the question, is Tony drunk? Because as far as I'm concerned, he looks inebriated and he sounds inebriated in this morning worship video. And if he was this inebriated, not just in the morning, because it's a morning worship, but also over a year before Bottlegate, this tells us that this is a long-standing problem, and there are no signs of things improving. If you do hold the theory or the opinion that Tony has an alcohol problem. Now, I did actually put the following montage of clips together, and I introduced it as a video to you guys so that you could vote on whether you thought Tony Morris was inebriated or not. In fact, the exact question was, is Tony's speech slurred in his morning worship talk in the August JW broadcasting episode? And these are the clips that I put to you guys.
It's not that you want to dwell on, and then you start feeling, well, what a miserable person I am. A lot of spiritual food for thought. Of course, anything Jesus said is spiritual food for thought. Thessalonians, that first letter, so if you'd find 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 5, somehow, because you're always looking to somehow lead us into breaking our integrity. What do you think about now? Okay. So the dragon became enraged. Great anger is very good. But see, he's enraged, and he's waging war with the remnant, as it brings out here. Even then, the recognition that we have to safeguard our heart. Notice what Paul wrote, very familiar verses, get God's thinking, and it's appropriate. Elders use the scriptures to discipline. However, we want to emphasize here for you, when something hits you, because maybe you've had wrong thinking, it could be all sorts of things, anything that could lead us astray and cause us to break our integrity, just face the fact. It's just between you and Jehovah. You're reading it, and let it discipline you in righteousness.
So those were all clips where I felt that Tony Morris seemed to be slurring his speech, or he seemed to be giving some kind of evidence that he was inebriated. And I put those clips with some funny music, and I asked this question, is Tony's speech slurred? And asked you to vote yes by liking the video, and no, and there were a few no votes, by disliking the video. So 146 of you said no, he wasn't slurring his speech. 2,400 of you said yes, he was slurring his speech. So obviously, you know, a consensus isn't a slam dunk. It just means the majority agree with me, but that doesn't mean he definitely was either slurring his speech or inebriated. But I find it hard to watch that footage that we've just watched and not think, if he'd have been pulled over and if he'd been speaking to the cops like that, it would be a dereliction of duty for them not to breathalyze him. And my money would be on a positive result if they had breathalyzed him. So just astonishing as far as I'm concerned that he can be giving this, again, rambling, incoherent, slurred morning worship in the morning, in which he is lecturing Jehovah's Witnesses on resisting temptation.
Having a desire to protect our relationship with Jehovah is closely linked to how much we appreciate what he's done for us. Our appreciation moves us to action and strengthens our faith in him. Such appreciation is highlighted in this month's music video, which is entitled Thankful.
Dandelions growing on top of the hill, mountains in the distance, wind blowing through the field, warmth of the sun casting down from the sky, birds fly up above, clouds rolling by. What did I do to see such beauty, and what do I do to show how much I care? I gotta be thankful. Tell Jehovah in prayer that I'm thankful for the love that he shares. Stop, look around, take a moment and let it sink down in my heart. Never take for granted all he's done. I gotta be thankful. Gotta be thankful.
So yes, it wouldn't be a JW Broadcasting episode without a cringeworthy music video, and in this video we see Van Morrison or someone giving a very convincing Van Morrison impression, albeit with very kind of, what's the word, underdeveloped lyrics, I think is a kind way of putting it. Basically singing a song where Jehovah's Witnesses are urged to draw evidence for their religion from flowers, dandelions, trees, the sky, mountains. All of these things are apparently clear, compelling evidence, not just that God exists, but that God's name is Jehovah and that he will one day slaughter everybody who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. And this sort of thinking, again, going back to what we were saying earlier about child indoctrination, is the sort of thing that you need to be pushing on children as early as possible.
Tell Jehovah in prayer that I'm thankful for the love that he shares. Stop, look around, take a moment and let it sink down in my heart. Never take for granted all he's done. I gotta be thankful. I gotta be thankful. Gotta be thankful.
Sometimes I just despair at the narrative behind some of these music videos where it's introducing you to someone and you're following them along thinking, oh, what are they doing? And in this case, you have a young lad called John, We know he's called John because he apparently has some kind of identity crisis, causing his parents to put his name in massive letters in his bedroom, just in case he's ever confused about who he is. And John goes to school and is visited by someone who has lions for the children to pet. And so John pets these lions and is videoed doing so. And when he gets home, his mum leaps on the opportunity to say, well, it's interesting that you were petting a lion, because here's a picture of the paradise in which one day lions will be herbivores and they will no longer eat other animals. In fact, no flesh-eating carnivores will exist. They will all revert to being herbivores, and this will happen in the paradise. So I'm jumping on this innocuous school visit as an opportunity to indoctrinate you. And so you might want to think about sharing this information with your school friends, which is exactly what John does. He somehow manages to divert the conversation to his lion petting incident and the obvious link between that and Jehovah's Witness propaganda about the paradise. So just so unrealistic and cringeworthy, and again geared, as so much of this stuff is, to convincing parents to hijack the brains of their children with this nonsense from the youngest possible age.
Do you enjoy a good story? If so, you're in for a special treat. A People for Jehovah's Name at World Headquarters in Warwick is more than a history museum. It's the modern-day story of a people seeking to know the true God and to do His will. But this isn't just any story. It's our story. So let's take a thrilling journey back in time. The story unfolds on the narrative wall and in several galleries along the way. We begin in the 1870s, when a small group in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, decided to re-examine the Bible. As C.T. Russell reasoned,
all the creeds of Christendom claim to be founded on the Bible, and these are conflicting. Is it possible that the Bible has been misrepresented?
The more they learned, the more they wanted to share. So in 1879, they began publishing Zion's Watchtower. Readers were soon taking a stand for the truth that they were learning.
So yes, we're back at Warwick, the headquarters, with its various museums and exhibits, which, as many of you know, I actually visited back in 2017 and produced a video about my visit. If there was a highlight about my visit, it was going round this particular exhibit, the A People for Jehovah's Name tour, and really it's Watchtower's attempts at completely whitewashing its history, giving a narrative about its past that is completely sanitized of anything controversial, anything that might make witnesses stop and think, hang on, how could this be God's organization if they were doing that sort of thing back in the early days? So all of that stuff, which is very well documented and mentioned in some of the organization's own literature in decades gone by, all of it is completely wiped from the tour, and you just get this, again, whitewash narrative that Watchtower wants witnesses to come away with. And I thought emblematic of that was this part where it shows you the very first issue of Zion's Watchtower. Now, I actually have, it's not an original, this is the first volume of reprints, and I actually have a version of this particular volume that's in better condition than this, but I keep it somewhere where it's not likely to be disturbed, because I want to preserve it as much as possible. This is in slightly worse condition, so this is the one I have on display in my collection. And I find it fascinating because just by reading a few of the words on this first ever page of the Watchtower, it's quite haunting in a way just how deluded Charles Taze Russell was. And you see exactly the same delusion and hysteria in the organization today. So let me read to you. This is literally the opening words of the first article. It's headed Prospectus. This is the first number of the first volume of Zion's Watchtower, and it may not be amiss to state the object of its publication, that we are living in the last days, the day of the Lord, the end of the gospel age, and consequently in the dawn of the new age, are facts not only discernible by the close student of the word, led by the Spirit, but the outward signs recognizable by the world bear the same testimony, and we are desirous that the household of faith be fully awake to the fact. And those were the opening words of the Watchtower, saying we're in the last days, which, if you think about it, is proof that the theology was completely different, because witnesses now believe, and have believed ever since Rutherford's Birth of a Nation article, which completely changed the theology. Witnesses now believe that the last days began in 1914. That was not the belief back in 1879 when this was written. Russell believed that the last days began in 1799, and that Christ's presence had already begun by that point. I think 1878, so the year before, was when Christ had begun ruling, and Armageddon would come no later. The absolute limit of Armageddon would be 1914. So those were the beliefs, and that's why Russell says there that we are living in the last days in 1879. But the thing is, Watchtower can show this sort of material and bank on the fact that witnesses aren't going to read it. They're just going to like the aesthetic. That's the whole point of this whole exhibit, is to just show what things looked like. Oh, this is what Rutherford's rainbow looked like. Don't bother reading it. You can just look at it. Look at all those beautiful colours. Look at all of these old artifacts. Look at all these old books, all these old magazines. Don't, open them and actually read them. Just admire them for their aesthetic value. And that, in essence, is what this tour is all about.
Then, in 1914, they presented the exciting photo drama of creation. Its purpose was to build faith in the Bible as God's inspired word. It was an innovative combination of moving pictures, sound recordings, and beautiful hand-colored glass slides. Hundreds of people reenacted Bible scenes, some with live animals. Was this enormous work worth all the effort?
Dear Brother Russell, I want to thank you, oh, so much, for the privilege of seeing the photo drama of creation. I had never thought to live to see the everlasting gospel preached to those who dwell on the earth. Yet so it is. Words cannot tell you how my heart rejoices. Your sister, F.E. Riley.
So this was another highlight for me in my tour of the history, the People for Jehovah's Name exhibit. They have this room that we've just seen there where they are talking about the photo drama of creation, and they have this big wall where you can see, I'm guessing, pretty much all the slides from the photo drama. And what's interesting is when you actually look closely at the slides, that's when you start to see the disturbing kind of hints of what's to come. But you're not supposed to do that, are you? You're supposed to admire from afar these kind of beautiful colours and this old imagery. You're not really, I think, supposed to scrutinize it, because if you do scrutinize it, that's when things start to come unstuck. And I do this with Peter, my friend, in the Warwick documentary that we made. There are slides about higher education where Satan is depicted as a red devil with a does he have a, I think he has a pitchfork, I can't quite remember, but so you have Satan there manipulating people to go through college and university, or Satan is used to scare people regarding college and university. And you also have this really disgraceful slide about Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, perpetuating this myth that this was the origin of the different races, and this was where the black race comes from. I think the sons of Ham was the idea that was perpetuated, not just by Russell but by Rutherford, all part of trying to denigrate black people and make them feel as though they're somehow accursed, is mentioned and is featured in the photodrama. And the very circumstances surrounding the release of the photodrama were mired in controversy regarding racism, because at a New York theatre where the photodrama was shown, this is all recorded, by the way, actually in the pages of the Watchtower, because Russell clearly felt quite justified in the way things were handled, and he was very, almost proud of how things were handled. But there was segregation at one of these showings of the photodrama, so that black audience members who were there to see the photodrama had to go and sit upstairs in the gallery, and they had to sit separately from white members of the audience. Again, all of this points very strongly to this being a purely man-made organization that was captive to the small-mindedness and bigotry of the times. But you're not going to see anything about that. Yes, you can see the slide of Noah's sons, but you have to look for it. And I think Watchtower are banking on the fact that witnesses aren't really interested in doing a deep dive into the history and finding out all of the both the good and the bad points of Watchtower's history. They just want to enjoy the spectacle. They just want to admire the aesthetics.
Then in 1916, the death of C.T. Russell left the Bible students in shock. It was a unique time of testing. Inside the organization, some struggled over who should take the lead. Outside, governments tried to force them to take sides in the war. Then, in 1918, J.F. Rutherford and 7 of his close associates were imprisoned. Was this the end for the Bible students? Or would they prove to be a people for Jehovah's name?
The joy that came with the release of our brothers from the Atlanta Federal Prison on Tuesday, March 25, 1919, knew no bounds. Their further devotion to Jehovah was shown in the fact that they immediately set to work to herald forth to the people of God everywhere the knowledge of Jehovah's deliverance. Thomas Sullivan.
So I'm really just skimming through a few of the highlights from this particular segment. The full segment goes into a bit more detail about the tour, but one of the most disturbing and one of the most frustrating elements of the Warwick People for Jehovah's Name tour for me was the way that it, as you would expect, entirely misrepresented this key part in the organization's early history, where Rutherford seized control of the organization in the wake of Russell's death. the way Watchtower portrays things, it was just obvious that Rutherford should be Russell's successor, and anyone who objected was being a troublemaker, and Rutherford was fully justified in throwing them out of the organisation and maintaining unity. And fast forward, and they're being persecuted and they're in the Atlanta penitentiary. There's far more to it than that. I'll try my best to summarise it, but basically, Rutherford was Russell's lawyer. That's all. He was Russell's lawyer, and boy did Russell need a lawyer when you look at all of the various controversies surrounding Miracle Wheat and Rose Ball, jellyfish and what have you. Russell was in need of a lawyer to keep his head above water. Rutherford obliged pro bono because he was a supporter of the Bible students. And upon Russell's death, Rutherford very cleverly managed to gain the presidency by currying favour with Van Amberg and with Macmillan. Macmillan had been Russell's kind of right-hand man. Van Amberg was the Watchtower secretary, and these two men held proxy votes for other members of the society, so that just by winning over these two men, Rutherford could essentially gain the presidency, which he did. He immediately started acting in an autocratic manner, which was not what Russell wanted. After his death, Russell laid out a will in which something closer to the governing body would have been the organisation would have transitioned almost immediately into more of a governing body arrangement. Instead, Rutherford steamrolled over all of that and started behaving in a very autocratic manner. And when four of the society's 7 directors, namely a majority, objected to Rutherford behaving in this way, Rutherford got them ousted, arranged for them to be ousted from Bethel and ousted from the society. So he wrested control. He immediately got involved in printing The Finished Mystery, which is one of the most ridiculous books the organization's ever had printed. It was a fanciful love letter to Russell that was attributing all sorts of Bible prophecies to Russell and making all sorts of far-fetched speculations about what various prophecies might mean, which I won't go into, but it was ridiculous. And some of the pages towards the end were actually written or penned by a member of Christendom's clergy, and this was a rant against America's involvement in the war, which was so anti-American that the Germans actually used these pages as propaganda and dropped them as leaflets, as propaganda leaflets on the Allied soldiers during World War I. It was because these pages were included, or mostly because these pages were included in The Finished Mystery, that Rutherford and his associates came to the attention of the authorities, and they ended up getting imprisoned in Atlanta Penitentiary under the Espionage Act of 1917, which incidentally is also the act under which Edward Snowden has been indicted. Little piece of trivia for you there. So if Rutherford had been a bit more careful and paid more attention to what was actually being put in The Finished Mystery, and if they hadn't included pages from a minister of Babylon the Great, it's possible that they never would have ended up in Atlanta Penitentiary, and they were rightly freed. It was all part of war hysteria, the reason why they ended up there to begin with. But because they'd been behind bars for a period, they were able to point to this and say, this proves Bible prophecy, in just the same way that the governing body is doing today with Russia, pointing to Russia and saying, this proves that Russia is the king of the North. They learned all of this from Rutherford, and Rutherford's ability to spin events in his life to use these to show that he had God on his side, or he was fulfilling Bible prophecy. And Birth of a Nation, which I mentioned earlier, was basically his key treatise on what the new theology would be. It all would begin with 1914 being the start of the last days, and 1918 would be when Jesus came to cleanse the temple, and 1919 would be when Jesus would select the Rutherford and his associates to be his faithful slave. Roughly, I've taken you on a whirlwind tour through that particular part of history, but none of that is alluded to in what we've just seen. It certainly isn't alluded to. There isn't an honest picture given in the Warwick tour. It's all total fluff intended to just impress witnesses that they at least have some history, never mind the actual events that transpired, never mind what was actually said and done at the time.
In this gallery, you will see how our brothers and sisters have stood firm for their faith. In Russia, a father imprisoned for 10 years encouraged his young daughters with hand-drawn postcards. In Greece, a son used the same blanket in prison that his father used when imprisoned before him. It was an encouraging reminder of his father's integrity. In Korea, witnesses were locked in tiny cells for up to 30 days at a time. When you stand in the lighted outline, you get a sense of what it was like.
Am I the only one who is slightly irritated by some of the expressions on people's faces? They seem quite feigned, almost as though, like that little girl there, almost as though they're being coached behind the scenes. Oh, we want you to look a little bit sad here. Could you just, could you just look a little bit sad towards your mummy while we're filming this? Because we want to really express to the brothers how awful all of this was. I don't know, it just seems very forced and artificial to me. This was also a room I went into during the Warwick tour. I didn't spend that much time, and I didn't realise if you pressed one of the buttons, it would illuminate this rectangle on the floor. I wish I'd done that now. Maybe I'll get another opportunity at some point. You never know. But yeah, what more evidence do you need that Watchtower relishes persecution, relishes the opportunity to point to examples of witnesses being oppressed by various different regimes through history, pointing to all of this as evidence? Oh, well, this must be God's one and only true organization because Jesus said that his followers would be persecuted. Well, here we're being persecuted, therefore we must be Jesus's followers. Ignoring entirely the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses by no means have a monopoly on persecution. There are many, many, many examples. I recently watched a Vice documentary. It was Isabel Young did an amazing documentary on the way that Muslims in a certain part of China are being systematically wiped out by the Chinese government, and they're even having their children taken from them and being re-educated to erase their Islamic culture so that they basically forget everything about the culture of their parents. It's actually quite chilling when you watch that documentary, but it also drives home the fact that Watchtower is deeply, not just disingenuous, but also frankly insulting in suggesting that they're the only ones that are being persecuted, that are being oppressed by Satan's system of things. There are loads of examples, but it doesn't suit Watchtower's agenda to highlight any of these other examples. They want witnesses to believe that they are the only ones being persecuted, because it's only when they start to swallow that idea that the theology even begins to make sense.
We've seen our tools continue to improve with the wise use of modern technology. From high-speed printing to the internet and video, these methods help us to stay unified, reach millions with the good news, and glorify God. Yes, this museum story is about people, but not just any people. We are a people for Jehovah's name. Only one question remains: what will you contribute to this wonderful story?
So yes, I'm afraid it's not just about going for a nice tour and looking at all of these wonderful exhibits and admiring how colourful they are and how quaint they are. And oh, look, there's an old coat from an old pilgrim, and there's his walking stick, and oh, there's a bicycle, and oh, look, there's a record player. No, we also want you to think about how you can contribute to this story, because the story continues. We have JW Broadcasting, we have all of these different ways that technology is being used to indoctrinate people and manipulate them. So we want you to involve yourselves in this continuing history.
The Navajo field has over 430 publishers, including approximately 130 regular pioneers and some 20 special pioneers. The literature, videos, and audio publications translated at the RTO are distributed to 8 Navajo congregations, 11 groups, and 5 pre-groups. For the past 5 years, 3-day regional conventions have been held in the Navajo language. In 2018, they had a peak attendance of 471 with 1 baptized. The volunteers at the RTO in Chinle send their warm Christian love to all of us around the world, and we love them dearly. This is JW Broadcasting from the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses.
So yes, that brings us to the end of the August JW Broadcasting episode. Am I the only one who was slightly underwhelmed by those numbers? So 430 publishers, if I recall, in the Navajo field, of which more than a quarter are pioneers, 130 pioneers out of 430 publishers. Okay, well, there's a lot of pioneers there, and they have a convention in 2018, and they managed to swell their numbers by 40, up to 470. Did I get that number right? And 1 baptism. Oh, well done, I guess. If I were a witness, I would be very unimpressed by those sorts of numbers. I suppose they would regard even 1 baptism as a huge success. But for me, the take-home message from this short segment is that no one's fooling the Navajo people, and that they're, even with the dedicated RTO, Regional Translation Office, servicing that particular language, that particular community, they're not quite succeeding in their efforts to railroad over the Navajo culture and supplant it with undying allegiance to the governing body. So that was pretty much everything I had to say on the August broadcast. I do apologise for doing this rebuttal so late. I was again just blown sideways by the Jared Scepter story. It continues to trouble me whenever I think about it, and I wanted that to be the priority once I found that. And again, I can't imagine, or I hope that Watchtower never produces anything worse than that. They've certainly not managed anything worse than that in the years leading up. And it was just so disgraceful to see the organisation celebrating a boy's death in that grotesque way. It's going to take me a while, I think, to get over it. But what we absolutely shouldn't do is allow Jared Scepter to be forgotten. We should continue to remind people of who he was and why he died. I feel very strongly about this because before we didn't know anything about him. before he was a complete unknown, as far as I'm aware. Maybe his family knew about him. Now, hopefully, millions know or have an opportunity to know about him. And the more people know about him and the more people understand why he died, the more his death can at least have some meaning to it, if that makes sense. It's never going to be a positive that he died, but if there can at least be some meaning to it so that others can realize that this is wrong, that there's absolutely no excuse for endangering the life of your children in loyalty to a Bible dietary restriction that has just been blown out of all proportion. Hopefully, I really do hope that Jared's story will save some lives if we, again, remember him and make sure others are able to learn from what happened to him and the tragedy of the way he was treated by a religion that should have been looking after him and caring for him. But that's pretty much everything I have to share for you with the August JW Broadcasting episode. I will, of course, be putting out the September rebuttal fairly soon, so please do look out for that. But yeah, that's everything. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. But for now, thank you so much for watching.